Thank you for that lovely introduction, Kent, and thank you guys for being here this evening. I'm excited to share with you guys about my work. Usually when I start my presentations, I kind of give context as to where I get my inspirations from, and then sometimes I'll want to go through it real quick and then ask, have you guys ask questions, since I really like to dialogue with people, but we'll see how this goes. So, yeah, so my name is Mona Cliff, and I'm a multidisciplinary artist. I am from the Ani tribe, and so it's federally recognized as the Bourbon tribe, which is French, and so that's not our name that we call ourselves. So Ani, or Aanin, means white clay people, and so that is the name that we call ourselves, and we are like a northern part of the Arapaho tribe. But I also grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and so I have kind of like a full spectrum of the Native experience, I guess, and now I live in Lawrence, Kansas with my kids and my dogs and my 2 cats too. There's more to that. And so, yeah, there's definitely always more. So I live in Lawrence, so I'm a transplant from the Pacific Northwest, but I grew up kind of going all over the country and traveling a lot. My grandparents left Fort Belknap, Montana back in the 50s, and my father was born in LA as part of the Relocation Act, and then they eventually moved and settled in the Pacific Northwest. And so I've kind of had like a really broad experience living in the city, but also going to the reservation. But I do feel that primarily the one consistent thing in my life has been our culture and our garments and powwows and ceremony, and a lot of these things that I've always been surrounded by. So that's why I include this, because these are regalia that we wear at our powwows. There is a whole broad spectrum, and what I've really come to understand, as I'm working through my career and applying needs, is that what I love about this is people's self-expression, because I feel that we have agency and freedom to be able to express ourselves and who we are, what tribes we come from, and so there's a whole visual language that's across the United States that each tribe has, each individual has, each family member has. So these I've included kind of like to showcase okay, this is how we would originally apply it. And seed beads are not necessarily, traditional items, but we've taken them and then we utilize them and we express ourselves with these seed beads far beyond how they were originally intended. And I always kind of joke, I'm like, if a native can beat it, they'll beat it, no matter what it is. So it's like, if you can imagine something being beaded, natives will be like, we're going to beat that. So, and now I've kind of taken it even further, let's do abstract expressionism. But, so I do have my degree in printmaking, and what I've come to find out about myself is that I love process. So, back in the late 1900s, when I got my degree, and what I had available to me was printmaking, but what I've come to understand later in life is that process is really what drives me as an artist. And the process of beading and seed beading, every single bead that you see on there had to be stitched on. And so what I've learned from my grandmother, so part of my journey was that while I was in college, while I loved learning about all the old masters, I still felt like a disconnect to the materials that I was using. And so I approached my grandmother and I asked her to show me how to do seed bead embroidery, or two-needle flat stitch is what we call it. And at the time, in being so much younger, I didn't really understand that I could bring these two worlds together. And so on my journey in life, as I moved around the country, and I eventually ended up in Kansas to go to Haskell Indigenous University, and then thus have my children. And raising my children during that time and being a stay-at-home mother, I just focused on traditional arts. And so these were the works that I made while I was doing motherhood. I didn't pursue contemporary art at the time, maybe contemporary beadwork. But at that time, I just wanted to focus on making regalia for my family. And my husband takes part, he's Osage, and he takes part in this ceremonial dance in the summertime called the Alanshka. And so I was really busy making regalia for my family, learning how to do moccasins, learning how to sew. And so all these parts, that I was learning and self-teaching while I was, raising my children and they were younger, I really wanted to focus on motherhood too. And then about 2018, I really felt this urge to start practicing contemporary art again, but I didn't know exactly where I needed to start. But this was the work I did with the seed bead, and this is all embroidered, so it was like hand stitched, and this is a lot of what I did before. So when I had come back to practicing art, like a contemporary art, I didn't know what my voice would be per se. Like I knew where I had come from and the things that influenced me, but I wasn't quite sure like how to go about that. So I initially started with this idea of generational knowledge, and mostly a lot of the work that I explore goes through like what identity is and like what are these indicators of what identity is. And for me, of course, it was regalia and the things that we use in ceremony. And then also how people express themselves through using these materials. That was what I kind of clung to in beginning this journey as a contemporary artist. And before when I was younger, I didn't really think that I could combine these things, but once I knew, children have a way of like really compressing like what you need to do. And so it was like, I really need to figure out and concentrate and like have like a really good, strong mission. And so I really knew that I wanted to speak on generational knowledge and like how information is passed down through generations, like especially with women and the things that we share with, what we learned, what we're sharing with our children, and then how they're going to carry that on. So that was really kind of like my main focus. And so I started with these images of blooms, and so the one on the right is like fabric applique, and then this was kind of like a mix of everything. This one right here on the left was really where I started to explore using shapes and not like creating like flat surfaces like I was with the stitching before. So I was using this image of the womb. This was like 2018, and all of that information coming out and like being shared with everybody. But this piece right here was the first one that I actually shared, where I was doing seed bead and starting to cross the idea of doing contemporary work and also using seed beads. I really like that one here. And then I started exploring this idea of like native futurisms, and so this had started out with this conversation that I had with somebody about sharing information beyond what you're just seeing at like a gallery or museum. And so I had this idea about a QR code. And strangely enough, it's like how weird it's shifted, like using this Twitter, and now it's, how that's changed just in such a short amount of time as well. But then I was also thinking about how rapidly identities change and culture changes and how it's constantly evolving. And a big part of like my work too is that I wanted to share that a lot of the work what people think about Native people is that we're kind of like these relics of the past, but it's not true, because from what I see in my experience, it's like it's constantly evolving and changing. And like I'll go to a powwow and I'll see all this regalia made, and I think some people probably imagine that there's like a very strict way of doing these, but then you'll see somebody using like a CD, like an old CD, like in their bustle, or they're just incorporating all these things, and it's really like a know-how, like this ingenuity that like I also learned from my grandfather. He was very, he had a lot of, he called it ingenuity, which I love. And I think I actually have a slide. So, he would rig everything, and that really came from, his growing up where, he grew up in a rural, extremely isolated Montana, and you just had to make do. And so when I was growing up, I would see him making do with everything that he had. And so, that was part of my teachings from my grandfather. So I started with this work right here, which I titled Tech Traditions, and I was kind of working along this idea of like how culture changes and evolves, but then at the same time, how we are still retaining this knowledge and these skills that somebody had taught us from the past. And so that's really where this work is beginning to explore right here. Which leads me to the gas mask. And so this was created right at the beginning of COVID. And I'm not sure if I was entirely influenced because my husband's a writer and he has these like amazing stories that he's telling. And we were traveling across Oklahoma, Oklahoma somewhere, and he was telling me the story and I was imagining the story that he was telling me. So I feel like there's a lot of different influences that came into making this mask. But yes, we were at the very beginning of COVID. I mean, we were like putting our groceries down, and like it was just a really scary time. And I was supposed to be doing residency in Santa Fe, and by the time they had accepted me versus when I needed to go, we had to shut down. And so I was just like at home with my kids and my husband. Like everybody was at home, and we were needing to protect ourselves. And I really believe that there was a huge combination of like what went into making these masks. And so really what this is about is still that idea of identity and like how the cultures shift, and like if there was a far future, like how would we be expressing ourselves in this far future, but still retaining this knowledge that we have that's been passed down over generations. And so that's where this mask has come to. And since then I've done probably about 6 other ones, and they're really changing and evolving as each one that I make. And I've noticed that I've been making these in pairs, and so I'm thinking that eventually once I start doing more installations with these, they're going to be a pair, like mates maybe. So yeah, so it's evolved to this one too right here, where I was thinking about the intakes, and like if we had this like, maybe the air that we're breathing, oh, I don't know what that is, sorry. I don't even know how to get rid of it. So, there it's gone now, okay. So yeah, it's just this continuing involvement of how I'm treating these masks and the things that I'm applying to them. So you can see like parts of that. There's like, there's this type of leather that we use, it's called rain tan leather, and it smells amazing. So when you get it, it smells like a fire, like you're sitting by the campfire. Like I love it. So I've been applying that. And the red that you see is the Oklahoma red dirt, like mixed with matte medium. And then the seed beads, of course, and different abalone shells. And so every pair of masks that I've been making have been a different approach in how I'm visualizing what these people and how they're running themselves in this future. So yeah, it's an ongoing series. I've been doing this since 2019. But the beadwork, so these pieces right here were from my very first museum commission at the Kansas City Museum. And at the time when they approached me, we were still doing virtual like Zooms and virtual everything. They had approached me to make a piece that would go into this doorway that's in between these 2 rooms. And at the time I was doing a lot of painting and murals, and I kind of wanted to get back to my bead practice again. And there's been a slow involvement in how I've been applying these seed beads. And so I had envisioned, we were discussing like what other artists were doing, and I had envisioned this piece of wood in that area, and that's where I began to think of these pieces right here, which I titled Papo, which means thank you. And so when I initially began to think about where these pieces would be placed and what they mean, my initial concept was about the idea of beadwork, whereas in our culture, like a lot of times when we make beadwork and we gift it to people, it's meant to like honor this other person, and it's not necessarily like the value of the materials, it's more about your time that you put into making that. And so I really wanted to apply that to this idea about giving thanks to the trees, because in my practice and our spiritual practices and like our worldview, it's like these things that are living around us are also our relatives, and it's not like it's not an entity that's not like alive, because it has a spirit in it, and it's alive, and it shares, this world with us. And so I really wanted to like show and take that concept of gratefulness and thankfulness and apply it to this. And so that's where these pieces had first initially come from. But they began to evolve as I was creating these. So I did 2 pieces for the museum, and it took me about 6 months, and this was the very first process that I went through. So looking back at it now, I can see like how reserved I was in applying this, but of course they also have all these things like the ADA compliant, and so there's all these other factors that I was thinking about, and then they were worried about the wood bringing bugs into the museum, and I was like, okay, so there was a lot of different things that I had to think logistically about what I was doing, but also making this piece that in a really unfamiliar practice, and but I really enjoyed it. It was fun, and it really led into all the other work that you see now at this Triennial. So this is a piece that's here at the museum right now. I really strongly believe that this is where, in my approach into what I was doing, that I started to tap into this other part of myself as an artist, where I like to say it was like a trust fall with myself. Like I really, working with beeswax, and this is how I apply the seed beads to the form, is using beeswax and pine resin and petroleum jelly. And I did a lot of research, and I'm always constantly curious about how other cultures around the world are utilizing seed beads in their culture and their self-expression. And so I did a lot of research, and I reached out to contemporary artists, and I kind of settled on this method right here, but I adapted it to be more aligned with like a lot of our practices as Native people. And at the beginning, I don't know, it's like I can point like the part where the seed beads meet the wood right there. And the other part of this too is that like I fished this wood out of a scrap pile at this lumber yard in Kansas City. So as I love this idea of like reclamation and like giving things a new life. And so yeah, I saved it from the scrap pile, and I got probably about 4 or 5 pieces out of it. This one piece of wood that was just laying there, doomed for, you know, like a life in the scrap pile. But anyways, so I began this piece, and I could feel I was being very reserved, and then there was a point kind of right in the middle. You can see that red area. I started to trust myself as an artist and not know exactly where I was going to go or end up. And what I love about this process and applying seed beads is that, you know, it's very laborious, but while I'm working, I can also slow down and be very intentional about the decisions that I'm making. And I don't always quite know exactly where it's going to end up. Like I haven't had an overall vision about what I wanted to do. It's like I'm being informed by what I've already done and what I need to do next. And I really see this as like layering, and that's why I titled it Conjured Topography, because I was drawing upon all these experiences growing up of traveling the United States all over. I mean, you know, before I was even 11, I traveled from Portland, Oregon all the way to Minnesota. So I've had all these experiences going along the Badlands and the Tetons, and, you know, my family, we traveled a lot, and there's always these experiences of these microclimates and, you know, all this vast change across our country. And I really feel like when I was making this piece, I was drawing upon all those experiences. And then also, you know, the idea of using these seed beads, because when you see this piece, and if you guys have been there, it looked like everybody had your hands up. When you've been there, it really is an experience when you're walking from one end to the other. I feel like it's really interactive, and that's really, I feel like I'm tapping into that experience when we go to powwows and I see all these people dressed in their regalia, and there's just this beauty about the motion and when they're moving, and like, you know, they're expressing themselves through dance and like, you know, the music, and so there's all of this experience that's like fully encompassing you. And, you know, I feel like I can impart some of that through my work and using these seed beads, because they're, you know, I've been surrounded by them my whole life, and it's like, how can I kind of take that experience and maybe reassess it and share it in my, you know, with my own vision. And so this piece, I feel right here, is really this transformative part to where I've like fully embraced the way that I approach my own work and like what's coming of it. So, so yeah, this is here's a detail of that piece right there, and I'll just let y'all take a look real quick. This piece took me about, I was rushing, so it took me about a month and a half. And like I said, when I'm making this work, I don't quite know exactly. As I'm starting, it starts with a few layers, and I build up and I build up, and then I spend a lot of time away from it, because when I'm really up close, I work on the ground, and I have all of my seed beads around me, like surrounding me. And, you know, I'm choosing the colors and I'm pulling from everything that I have around me and seeing what needs to happen next. And as I'm working, I have to keep the wax warm. And so I have a little space heater, my trusty little space heater that I'm like shooting at the area that I'm working at. But it's really slow, and I love that because like normally my brain's like, you know, firing at like 500 miles an hour, and it's nice for me to be able to kind of slow down and just sit with myself and like just work at like a really slow pace. And I love painting, but painting is scary because I feel like you have to make decisions really fast, and this is like more comforting in a way, working with the beads and seeing how they're interacting with the light. That to me is really the fun part. So this work right here, which I titled Stratify, is really kind of a departure from all of that other work where I'm beginning to like branch out away from the wooden form. And I love the wooden form because there's all of these beautiful things that are like happening inside of the wood. Like there's all of these really deep, small details, and as I'm preparing that wood, it's like I'm getting acquainted with it. And I really do feel like it's a conversation between what I'm noticing, this natural state, and what I really love too about that is that like also every ring that you see is evidence of its life, that it's lived, you know, even though I'm just working with this piece that's already been taken down, there's still that evidence, all in a part of that, and even the really subtle colors are very influential to what I'm doing. But I also felt like that I needed to start working beyond maybe having the wood as an anchor, because also my approach was changing as well. Like initially when I did the first two pieces, it was about honoring the wood and it was about that, but what I became to understand through my work was that it's also me tapping into my own maybe subconscious experiences and like how I've approached and connected to the world around me. So this piece right here is titled Stratify, which is now in the permanent collection at the Autry Museum, is really me going beyond that piece of wood and branching out. And so, funnily enough, I do have, here's a detail. So I was working in my studio and I had actually just finished a pair of earrings for my daughter for her prom. And I was using the rhinestone, which is really pretty popular when you wear your powwow bling, you know, when you go anywhere and you have rhinestones. I just happened to look and see that rhinestone and I thought, I held it up and I was like, oh my gosh, yes. So anything more blingy and bright that I can use, I'm just gonna start adding it. So there's all this like pupil beads that I've added and the rhinestones and the way that they catch light, I just absolutely love, and now they've become like permanently a part of like my arsenal of materials. And then I really wanted to like bring together the idea of this other work, this organic abstraction that I've been doing, because I do feel that this is it's abstraction, but it's also expressive abstraction, but it's just at like a really slow pace. I mean, because I'm not planning it out and it's just evolving the way it needs to evolve, but I'm also expressing myself, but like at a glacial pace. But I wanted to connect that to, like, how do I connect this work to this other work, which is these gas masks? How am I going to bridge? Because I do feel like, while they look, very different, I do feel that there is a connection, and I'm working to find out what that connection is between these two works, and like how are they going to evolve, like coexist and co-evolve together. So this work right here is also at the Autry, and yeah, I started incorporating like and using resin on a lot of the different like plants that I found around there, incorporating that into the work as well. And it, of course, still the dirt. I love dirt, and it's like, how am I going to bring this into my work? So there's just so much beauty about it. Like but so yeah, when I was asked to come and be part of the Triennial, I was like, me? Like, really? Okay. It was really an honor, and I really felt excited, and I really wanted to do something really different from what I had been doing. And funnily enough, I had this color palette of this blue I have been collecting. So a lot of times you can order seed beads online. That's no fun because you can't like hold them. But I go to powwows, and when get all your regalia there, and they have like walls of beads. And so every time I go down to Oklahoma, I'm like, I'm gonna go to Supernaws, I'm gonna go to Sharps, and I'm gonna hit it up because then I can like look at the beads and hold them and see how like the light is working with them. And so I had been collecting this color palette for quite a long time, like 5 years. So I had these beads, and but it was a challenge. And I also wanted to challenge myself to, like, how I am going to approach doing this bead work. What is my approach? What is going to be the concept? And it's kind of based off this funny thing that my husband shared with me. He said that he really disliked the wind, and I was like, okay, we're living in Kansas, but he would get really annoyed with it. And he was like, oh my gosh, it's so annoying. And I just thought that was such a funny thing that he was so annoyed with. He's like, it's whipping your jacket around, and it was just a funny little thing that he shared. And I did think about, like, so it made me start thinking about like how there's these forces in our lives that we don't have any control over. Like, we don't have control over the wind. We can only control like how we respond to it, right? Like, if you're gonna get annoyed, or if you're just gonna kind of take it and keep going, you know. So I was thinking about that, but also like these ideas of like parenthood, and like how a lot of times like you may think you have an idea about how things are supposed to go, and then there's how it goes, you know what I mean? And there's how you respond to it. And you know, being a stay-at-home mom all these years, and I still am, you know what I mean? You know, it's like, how am I responding to all of these things out of my control? And so that's where I had titled this piece right here, which is also in the Triennial. I titled it, what did I title it? Oh my God. You can't see the wind. I thought that's how funny it was that you can't see it, but it's like controlling all these things around us constantly. Even knocking over this ginormous like tree branch next to us and not being power out. It's just like, there's all these things that happen. And so when I wanted to do this work initially for the Triennial, I wanted to take these two things, like these two like opposing ideas about like chaos and like how things happen, but how we're going to respond to it. So like intention and chaos. And so when I started working with this, I just dripped all of the wax on the canvas, and I kind of wanted to mirror it because I was also thinking about Rorschachs, and I'm like, why is it that, you know, how are they going to understand, you know, who we are based off of this blob, you know? And so I just was thinking about Rorschachs, but I was also thinking about things out of our control, and yeah, and so then, but then also approaching that work and not changing what initially happened either. And how are these decisions that I'm making while I'm working with this, and you know, how long it takes to apply the beads to the wax. Every decision that I was making along the way, and ultimately how it came out. And so that's really that approach. And I think that's really my way of really coming out of using the wood as an anchor to where I'm starting, and just kind of letting my ideas come out as they need to, or how I'm responding to that. So that really was the influence when I made this piece right here. And so another part of my work that I started in, oh my gosh, I went to a residency in Santa Fe 2 or 3 years ago. And I had the space to do cyanotype, and so that's where I began starting to work with cyanotype. And so you see these pieces over here are my most recent pieces that I had done. But I still felt like I needed to incorporate beadwork because I do just love the idea of using seed beads and having that still be a common thread throughout my work. And so these are the pieces that I began to make with those. And I do believe that the Lone Star is going to become more of a staple, and I'll be doing more work on a series on that. And then as you can see, the involvement of the gas mask as well is beginning to change, and I was using the cyanotype cloth along with the seed beads as well. And just bringing all these other pieces as a part. So yeah, this is more of my work that I did with cyanotype. This design element right here is actually from a beaded work of an Arapaho design, which is, you know, one of my other tribes. And so I titled this Plain Stratify, but I'm still, the images that you're seeing, the image that you see is actually of my beadwork from from the very beginning. Yeah, so I was utilizing that as part of But going into the rest of my practice, I've been making these pieces here recently. I was approached to do a commission for the Spencer Museum for an exhibit they titled Native Fashion. And so when she initially asked me to come and do the work for that, she wanted me to do a temporary mural on these big pillars that they have in the middle of the museum. And she's like, we always want to address this, we just don't know how, and can you do a mural? And I thought, I kind of kept thinking about the logistics of like painting and making it temporary, and it just wasn't fitting. So I did a walkthrough when they were preparing the exhibit, and I realized, I'm like, oh my God, fabric applique, which is a prevalent part of a lot of our regalia is using applique, and so that's where I had come up with these two initial designs that had been hung from the pillars at the museum, and they're 17 feet, they're huge, but it really like pushed me into this whole other area because I had wanted to start using fabric more often in my work. And so these are the two on the right-hand side, your right-hand side right there. Those two ones are the most recent ones that I did for my solo show at OU, and that's where I'm incorporating the cyanotype and the fabric and the ribbons. And for me, when I do my mural work, and I don't have examples of my mural work, but you can look at my website. When I started doing mural work in 2019, and 2020, 21, 22, I really started to settle on a theme of using ribbon skirts because within our culture, Native women make these ribbon skirts, and for me it's like a symbol of like agency and self-expression. And I love the fact that like, no matter where you go in the country, somebody will have a ribbon skirt on, and that's their way of empowering themselves, and I really love that idea. And so I started incorporating it into my mural work, and it being like the base of my mural work. But now I'm bringing it out into like the physical world, which I really want to express myself. And I see banners as like a call to arms in a way, and it's like we're taking up space, and this is who we are, and it's like for me, it's like taking that symbol of empowerment and just blowing it up and making it bigger. So these right here were the first ones that I did on here on the left, and the last ones that I had just recently made. This is at the Elger Arts, Elger Arts in Kansas City. So these actually are the smallest ones that I've made so far, which is funny. I went from like 17 feet to like 6 feet. But I really did enjoy making these, and I'm going to continue making them. And as you can see, the involvement of the gas mask as well, this is kind of where it settled on, and we continue to make that work as well. And when I just recently had my solo show, while I love doing the beadwork, it's really laborious and it takes time, and I'm starting to think about how am I going to fast track like expressing like what is going to be my expression in other forms and other material forms. And so through painting, I'm trying to bring in like how I'm going to change how I'm approaching painting as well. How am I going to bring these two worlds together? And so this was really me playing and having fun. So that was my most recent painting work that I've done. I think I'd like to take questions now. If you guys have any questions.
My question is, as a college girl, I know nothing. And you always look toward like motherhood and being a painter and an artist while raising up kids. That's my dream. I have a great family, paint some portraits, But how did you enter into like that creating while caretaking? Because that's whoa, I want to do that. It's so cool. You have like exhibitions here, museums commissioning you, like, whoa.
Yeah.
Dang,
And my kids are teenagers now. I have an 18-year-old, so it was really once they got to like, okay, they're not going to kill themselves at home. Like, they can feed themselves. They can get into the fridge on their own. That really was like my decision to like go into starting to really embrace my art career. Because before that, for the first I really started being a stay-at-home mom in 2009, and it wasn't until 2018 that I really began to pursue an art career, because I knew for myself, and there's so many other mothers out there that are amazing and they're artists and I really admire them, that they're juggling the two. They're juggling motherhood and having an art career. But for myself, I knew, and I still am juggling this, like I am juggling it still. But I knew I didn't want that to interfere with my journey as a mother. But I was still creating, and so that really was, I almost call it like a self-imposed artist residency, but I was learning like traditional crafts, and I was focusing on that, because at that time that's what was important to me, was to be able to outfit my whole family. And so like I made us all moccasins and their dresses for them to dance, because for me it was important for them to participate. And even now, like my daughter's getting ready to graduate from high school, and I'm like, okay, we gotta make you a belt, we gotta make you a ribbon skirt, I gotta bead your cap, and then I'm like, oh wait, but then I also gotta get ready for this, like, you know, I gotta get ready for this exhibition, and it's like big work. And so it really, now that they're older, I have help, which is great. Like I wouldn't have been able to really do it before. And it's a juggling act, and I think that, you know, but I have a lot of support, so I feel like that's really important, because it would be a lot more difficult without the support that I have. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So cool.
And I also feel like I'm making up for lost time, so I'm like, okay, let's just go, like, you know. So let's just get this all done in one fell swoop. Yes.
Please mention that you had.
Oh, sorry. She's got the mic. I don't know who's next. Okay.
So, I'm just fascinated by all you said, but one of the questions I had was, what makes a ribbon skirt empowering to women?
I feel like it's the ability of the person who makes it to express themselves. I really do feel like that's where the empowerment lies. And in the very first pieces that you saw, that was really me thinking about how we express ourselves in culture. So it's like, I'm always endlessly fascinated by different cultures and how they're expressing themselves, and visually, it's a visual language if you think about it. And like my own interests, understanding like the visual language of these different tribes throughout the country. So like if you are aware, you'll know, you're like, oh, that's coastal art. Like everybody knows what coastal art is, or like, you know, art from the Southwest or from the Northwest. There is a language, and that really is how we like had shown other people, other tribes who we were. It was like, oh, well, I know this is a Dakota floral, or like the Plains tribes, a very geometric work. And so in my self-directed study, so I, you know, researching other cultures, and especially when seaweeds were introduced into their culture as trade, how did they take that material and utilize it for their own self-expression? And that really is kind of the foundation of where I'm using to like go through my work. And so I see ribbon skirts as just another way, because anybody has access to that. And even if they don't see themselves as artists, and I really wish people were like, oh, I'm not an artist. I'm like, everybody has, it's like a muscle, you have to just work out, you know what I mean? It's like you have to constantly be practicing it in order to continue to do it. And I feel that when people have access to those things and those materials, they're able to express themselves and show everybody else, this is who I am. And so they'll add the applique, and they'll be like, you know, maybe put a butterfly, or, you know, a hummingbird, something that represents what they have a personal connection to. And so that's what I wanted to bring into my work. And initially it started with murals, because a lot of the murals that I have in Lawrence, it began with a grant. And my work was initially meant because we have Haskell Indian Nations University there, there's people from all over the country who come there to go to school, and then their families come to visit them during, you know, graduation. And I really wanted to have something that our people could be like, see themselves in our community. And so initially, the ribbon skirt was that symbol. That was what I used to like convey that message, because other names were like, oh yeah, okay, they can instantly clock it, you know what I mean, and be like, yeah, that's like, and so that's what I wanted. And you know, I'm still working towards that, you know, writing grants and continuing to have us be able to express ourselves and our voices out in the community. So I think next.
I think I understand that there's 4 murals in Lawrence, and 2 are at Haskell, and 2 are where else?
Oh yeah, okay, so I'm starting to think, I'm like, okay, I've got 2 inside Haskell, 1 in Cushmataha, and 1 in Sequoia Hall, and then there's the one that I did through the Rocket Grant, the Charlotte Street Foundation, which is under the bridge on East Frontage Road. Yeah, so that I felt, and I am gonna paint the other side eventually. And then I just recently did one last spring, across the parking garage across from the Lawrence Art Center. Yeah. So that's it was the grant was like we had to include Welcome to Lawrence, but he was like, do what you want. And I was like, I'm gonna do it. And it's so funny because like doing murals, I don't have any apprehension. I'm like, let's go do this. I know what I want. And then I get in my studio and I'm like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? And so it's like I'm trying to bring my mural painting work into the rest of my practice and that sense of confidence. I'm like, okay, how am I going to express myself in my studio? So yeah, that's that. Yeah, and then there's 2 in Topeka. So I did one along the Shunda the Shunda Trail bike thing. There's one along there that we did, and then there's one on the Habitat for Humanity building in Noto. So that was like my first super big wall, so it was a lot of fun. And that one I worked with some tribal members, Potawatomi tribal members, and asked them like, what do you want to see here, and what am I going to do? Yeah.
Hello. Hi. 2 questions, real quick. How large are these and what medium?
40 by 60 inches, yeah, so they're pretty big.
Yeah.
And it's all acrylic.
Okay.
My Nova colors that I use on my murals.
And
That's a lot.
the dimension in your beadwork, like is that the wax that's making the hills and valleys?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and it's like once you start working with it, what I'll do is I have like an old crock pot that I got from the thrift, and I put all of this stuff in there, so it's like beeswax, which I get locally from one of our local beef stores, and then pine resin. I also add like copal resin, and then petroleum jelly, and I let it just kind of all mix, like, stirring the pot, cackling over it, so I'm sitting there like, brew, bubble, and everything, but and then once it's ready, I pour it into molds, and I have that ready. And then once I'm ready to work with those pieces, I'll just take my trusty little heater and shoot it out there, and it starts to like get nice and malleable. And then I'll start shaping it like on the canvas or the plywood. So like the backing for those pieces is plywood. It's a really thin plywood. I mean, almost to the point where it's like when I try to get the nails in there to hang stuff, it's like I gotta be really careful. It's not gonna come through. Nothing else is screwed. So like where am I placing everything? Everything's always like this whole act of like balancing like the logistics of it all. So yeah, but yeah, it's really fun to work with, and there's a certain smell. So that's kind of like triggering in a good way because I'm like, I'm gonna get to work and I'm gonna start, putting my beads on there. Any more questions?
One more question.
Hi, thank you again for speaking. I love your work. I kind of piggyback off of that question. With your process, especially like the ones that you have in the Triennial and stuff, do you do all of the like wax and resin stuff first? Do you do it kind of bit by bit? What does that process look like?
Yeah, I like have almost a production line of work, and so right now I have my crock pots like full of solidified beeswax, but I just turn it on and it gets everything going, and then I start pouring my molds. Like I have these cute little molds, silicone molds that I got from like a craft store, and they're like in the shape of a bee cone, which I think is funny, kind of. But yeah, so then I'll prep a lot of stuff, and then also prepping the wood is a whole thing. Like I have to sand everything down and do different grits, and then prepare it on the plywood. And then once I get that part all done, and then I start to add my wax on there, kind of, really the wax is the first step to kind of see, like I was saying, but the blue pieces that you see was a whole different process because it was on canvas. And that was weird. It was like, when I work on the plywood, I just am applying the seed beads and it's pretty stiff. But then when I was working on the canvas was shaking. I was like, this is distracting. And like, I was trying to work and think and do do that, so I don't know if I'll do it on canvas again, but, you know, wood, plywood, and those things are really nice and sturdy, and then once I've really established kind of like the general idea, then I start to apply the beads on there, and more often than not, I don't subtract. Like I won't take away, I won't take away like any parts, and I might add, like I might take a piece from here and go there, and see how it's evolving, and then either let it be or change things, you know, but not often, because the wax, you know, once I embed that beads into the wax, you can take it out, but it's really messy, and you're losing those beads, and I'm kind of like a stickler, and like, I don't want to waste anything, you know. So yeah, the fun part is, you know, building up the wax. And I'm also starting to think, because I have this big project coming up, and I'm needing to really make everything super big, and like, how am I going to do that? What forms am I going to use? How am I going to make it lightweight? So there's all of these challenges within trying to expand this beading practice into something bigger and more accessible too.
Well, I just want to add one thing. If you are not following Mona, and I joke sometimes we need to have her back and just talk about sumo wrestling. Mona's an absolute, like, crazed fan of sumo, especially one wrestler in particular. Yeah. But yeah, her Instagram account is a great follow if you enjoy music, sumo, and of course, her dogs and fantastic art. So thank you, Mona. Those of you that are going to stay with us for a reception this evening, the director's circle, just hang around a little bit, and we will get you guys directed to where we need to go. Thank you all so much for coming.